So we're going to start today by reading or doing our prayers. So I'd like to ask everyone to take a nice big deep breath and let it all go. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me. I will be I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal. All right, so we've been working on the miracle principles, which are found at the very beginning of the book, I believe on page 7, very close to the beginning. And we're going to start with miracle principle number 19. So let me see what page that one's on. All right, it's on page 4 at the very beginning in chapter 1. But before I go on, I want to give the definition again of what the miracle from the perspective of the Course and Ken Wapnick's teaching means. The miracle is the change of mind that shifts from our perception from the ego's world of guilt, sin, and fear to the Holy Spirit's of forgiveness. It is the expression of joining with another that corrects and undoes the error of separation. Miracles transcend the laws of this world to reflect the law of God, and they are accomplished by the Holy Spirit or Jesus through us as being the means of healing ourselves and others. Not to be confused with the traditional understanding of miracles as changes in external phenomena. So I'm going to read through that again, highlighting some aspects of it. So the miracle is the change of mind that shifts your perception. Okay, so my perception is to see my world through the lens of the ego. That's automatic. I don't have to work on that. I don't have to do anything special for that to happen. And the way the ego situation has been set up is I'm an innocent victim of circumstances beyond my control. And if it wasn't for you, the weather, my body that aches, whatever the specific form that gets fit into that happens to be, I could be at peace. But the Course is always trying to help us understand that is incorrect. When you are coming from the ego, you are projecting your guilt, sin, and fear into the world, and then you perceive the guilt to be outside, when in essence, the guilt you see outside is actually coming from the choice within to choose for the ego instead of the Holy Spirit. And let me just point out this chart. So when we choose for the ego, we originally at one with God. When we chose the ego, we chose the absolute opposite of what the attributes of God and love are. So then we projected that into the world, and we perceived the world through the lens of the ego. And as it was set up, as I mentioned, I'm an innocent victim of circumstances beyond my control that something or someone in the world is doing to me. And the Course is saying you already have guilt, sin, and fear in your mind when you're aligned with this part of the chart. And what you need to do is go back to the cause, which is the belief in separation, drop this story and come over to this side. And then you will begin to have the reflections of the love that's already in your mind come to the surface. But as long as the ego's engaged, in charge, however you want to put it, the effects are always going to be some form of I'm an innocent victim of circumstances beyond my control. And they lie in some form of guilt, sin, and fear. So he goes on to say, a miracle is a change of mind that shifts our perception from the ego's world of guilt, sin, and fear, and to the Holy Spirit's of forgiveness. And forgiveness in the Course doesn't mean forgiveness of, somebody's doing something wrong to me, so I'm going to forgive them. It means I forgive the part of my mind that has chosen for the ego, and then I turn myself over to the Holy Spirit. As long as I'm forgiving somebody here, I'm just playing in the effects of this choice. I'm not making a different choice. All right, so we're going to turn it over to the Holy Spirit, which the forgiveness there is none of this happened, and I want to align with what is truth. All right, it is the expression of joining with another that corrects and undoes the error of separation. I see my brother and I as different. When I say, I don't know, this is my experience, but I don't know what my brother really is, you're then inviting this door to open so that you can align with the Holy Spirit. And let me just real quickly go to workbook lesson 23, because it explains a bit about this idea of how this takes place. In this particular workbook lesson, and that's 23 again, is I can escape from the world I see by giving up attack thoughts. So I have to give up my attack thoughts. In paragraph number 5, it says, the idea for today introduces the thought that you are not trapped in the world you see, because its cause can be changed. All right, so in the past, we thought we were caught in the world and there was no way out. The Course is opening the door, introducing us to a different way of being, which means, again, I have to relinquish my attack thoughts on my brother and align with what truth is instead. All right, so it goes on to say, because its cause can be changed. Well, the cause is my alignment with the ego. The Course is always talking about, in fact, there's a workbook lesson that says there's one problem, one solution. The problem is we chose for separation. The solution is to align with truth, and then separation falls away, because it's either I'm aligned here or I'm aligned here. And I like to think of it as, if you've ever driven a stick shift car, you can only be in one gear at a time. One or the other is always what is required. So he goes on to say, this requires, and it's going to be 3 steps. The first step is that the cause be identified. And the cause is not what's going on over here. In fact, workbook number 5 talks about the idea of I'm never upset for the reason I think. I always think I'm upset for some reason that's taking place in my world. This is saying you're upset because you've chosen the ego. You've chosen against truth. So that's what the identification is right there. And then let it go. So then you recognize I've chosen for the ego. And, we use the world as a screen for us to recognize, oh gosh, I'm aligned with ego. How do I know? Because I'm not at peace. And if I'm not at peace, it means I'm aligned with the ego. But now I have another choice. But I have to let this go in order to access that. And then he says that, and so that it can be replaced. And it's not replaced by me, it's replaced by the Holy Spirit. So let me read that last line again. This change requires first that the cause be identified, which is I'm aligned with the ego. Second, and then let go, which is number 2, so that it can be replaced. And that would be number 3, which does not require you. And in fact, it goes on to say the first 2 steps in this process require your cooperation. The final one does not. Your images have already been replaced, because this is like a shadow or a cloud covering over what the truth is. And when you ask to see this differently, you're literally removing the block to the awareness of love, which will then automatically rise to the surface. By taking the first 2 steps, you will see that this is so. And that's a big part of the process of working with the Course, is this concept of removing the blocks to the awareness of love. But first of all, I have to recognize what the block is. The block isn't an issue with my brother. The block is that we chose separation. And again, number one, recognize this is what we chose. Number two, am I ready to drop this or let this go so I can find out what this is? And sometimes you may have a whisper in your ear that says you could choose peace instead of this, but you're not ready to relinquish the conflict or thinking you're right or being in charge or whatever it is. And as long as you're not able to do that, this is waiting for you, but you have to be willing to let this go. And Jesus would not reprimand you. He would not yell at you. He would simply say, when the pain of choosing for the opposite of love becomes more apparent to you, you will eventually relinquish your hold on trying to be right or thinking you know the answer. And you will then choose because you want peace more than anything else. All right, so that's what the basic of this three-step process is. And again, we're relinquishing the guilt, sin, and fear by dropping the story of what we have accepted as the problem. And with our hands up, I don't know. Okay, so back to the definition of the miracle. Miracles transcend the laws of this world to reflect the laws of God. And if you want to think about this chart, these are the laws of the world. These are the laws of God. The ego laws are separation, you against me. The ego's laws are you and I are the same. Very different storyline. And again, we spend most of our time here and we're being asked when we're ready, when we're willing to relinquish this, go back here, and then have him show us the answer. And again, we're in control of this. It's sort of like, they have buttons you can push if you're in the hospital and you're in pain, that you can administer your own relief, your medication for relief of pain. Well, this is our relief from pain, but I have to be willing to relinquish this. I cannot be in control and have him be in control. Again, one or the other, mutually exclusive. But when we do that, as it said, miracles transcend the laws of this world or reflect the laws of God. And I know many people have shared stories in the group of times when they have relinquished their hold on the ego and have stepped over here. And the results of that have been something that they would never have thought of an answer to. So when we're stepping over here, it's with totally empty, completely empty hands. If I have an investment in how the outcome has to be in order for me to accept peace, I might as well forget it because it's not going to happen. I have to come with totally empty arms. Now, that doesn't mean if you recognize I'm not ready to let go, that you still can't ask. You can ask, show me how I get to the point where I'm ready to relinquish my hold so that I can align with you. So there's never a time when you can't ask for help, but our eventual goal is to come with totally empty hands so that he can fill that space instead of us coming with all of our stuff in that process. And it's sort of like if I come to the altar with all my stuff, whether it's positive or negative, I still have my stuff, and our eventual goal is to take everything off the altar and allow him to fill that space instead of anything that I can contribute to that. Right. So where are we? They are accomplished by the Holy Spirit or Jesus through us. And again, step one, recognize what the problem is. Step two, let it go. Step three is the Holy Spirit's deal. I'm out of that. I don't have to figure it out. Which when we get comfortable with this and we become acclimated to this, it becomes so freeing because I don't have to be God. I don't have to run the universe. I allow him to run the universe. And of course, when I do that, it works far better than when I think I have to be in charge. Being the means of healing ourselves and others. So when I ask for healing or asked to align with my right mind, I then align with the right mind as well as reflect in the world the light that shines on my brother that shows him there's another way. Because as long as we're both bouncing back and forth over here, it's always a competition. It's always I'm better than you, I'm worse than you. And it doesn't, Ken used to say, doesn't matter what part of this play we play, as long as I'm special, different, and in control. And I have to be willing to relinquish those. And remember, I have to be willing to relinquish that in a moment. I don't have to climb the mountain to the top. In this moment, am I willing to relinquish this so I can find out what he has to say instead? And then he goes on to say, not to be confused with the traditional understanding of miracles as changes in external phenomena. This is a change in mind. Okay, this is where the whoops upside down. Imagine that, us upside down. So this is where the magic happens, not down here. This is simply the projection on the screen in a movie theater of what the film is that's in the projection. So when you remove that film, what comes out is the reflection of the light or love. All right, so we are going to go to miracle number, lucky number, where is it? Well, where did I put the miracle I'm looking for here? All right, miracle number 17. Miracles make minds one in God. They depend on cooperation because the sonship is the sum of all that God created. Miracles, therefore, reflect the laws of eternity, not of time. So miracles make minds one in God. I am aligning with the miracle that is making us one instead of separate. They depend on the cooperation because the sonship is the sum of all God created. And at one point in time, there was only one son. That one son chose to separate. That separated son was in its mind. It didn't have a body. It didn't have any world or anything such as that. It was totally in the mind. And when it was in the mind, it had all this guilt, sin, and fear. And the way that the Son of God handled that, because he was too afraid to go back to God, because he believed he stole from God and made of God something other than love. So now he's afraid to go back to God because he thinks God's going to do that back to him. So what the Son of God then decides is, what can I do to maintain my separation but not be guilty, not be sinful? And the answer they came up was to splinter out into a bazillion different pieces in the world and project into the world the guilt that's in his mind to something outside of him. And again, this can be a person, a place, a situation, an experience. It can be my physical body, so that I can play the part of an innocent victim of circumstances beyond my control, which require some form of perpetrator. The perpetrator could be physical illness. The perpetrator could be my boss. It could be the person cutting me off on the road. It can be literally my fingernail breaking. It can be literally, absolutely, positively anything that seemingly takes my peace away. That I am justified to hate and attack. And then I just continue to recycle this and make this more alive. And what we want to do is spend more and more time up here, where we're observing the character called me in relationship to the world. And the difference between being here, if you notice this little red circle, I'm either here or I'm here. When I'm here, I'm recycling the ego storyline. When I step above, observe what's going down here. And initially, we will do that holding on to our judgments and attacks, but eventually we can be up here and simply watch the play go by without judgment or any attack. And when we can come to do that, we are then ending the need for time, because you need time here. Up here is time is not required. And let me just real quickly show this picture. When we rise above the battleground, or we have the holy instant, we have the little willingness, however you want to call that, we're literally rising above the world, and the world is tick, 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 tick of time. But that one instant where I'm willing to empty my hands, come with holding empty hands, I'm literally rising above the world. I'm out of time and space where my body doesn't exist. Now that happens really quickly because I quickly come back down. But the beauty of this is while I'm gone, this amount of time has been collapsed that I don't have to live through. And the course definitely explains that this is a course in breaking down time, so I don't have to be in the misery of duality as long. All right. And so it says, it goes on to say, miracles therefore reflect the laws of eternity, because when I'm out of time, as we showed on this chart again, when I rise above, my altar's clean and I'm literally out of time and space. There's no me that has thoughts or beliefs or fears or body or anything. All of that is part of this. And when I relinquish that, even for a moment, I clear the slates, and then the answer of what truth is will come to my awareness. Now, I may not even become aware of that, and be very vigilant of the idea. This is not fixing this. This is fixing this. Okay. So when I come back down, this may actually look worse than it did before. But if I've literally relinquished this and chosen for this, something has shifted in my mind that will then eventually bring forth a reflection of that healed in feeling in the world, instead of the projection of the ego that's usually going on when we're aligned with the ego. All right, so this means that what miracles do is restore to our mind the awareness of our oneness in God. So the awareness of the oneness of God is found over here. It is not found over here. Again, I like the words. What this does is restore to our mind. So my mind gets restored to the connection with what I've always been, that I have forgotten because I've literally covered this over by this belief system. And when I do that, all I can see is this. Even though this is here waiting for me, I will only know of this. Miracles do not make us one in God. Miracles remind us that we are one in God. So once again, it's basically, yes, it's basically this idea of, this is the Holy Spirit. It's constant. It's like the sun. The ego covers it over. When I ask for help, all I'm doing is removing the blocks to the awareness of love, and love is right there. But I have to be willing to have this be removed, really willing to relinquish this so that I can find out what this is. Keep remembering, it is what I am. But if the blocks to that awareness are glaring in my experience, it simply means that's what I've chosen instead of what love is. And I can now make that choice. Remember, the ego is about the belief that we are separate. Again, oneness, separateness. Okay. When we chose to separate from the love of God, and we said we wanted to be something, the first initial relationship was God and me. And this is me. I'm even an innocent victim of a God. In fact, the Course even goes so far as to say that the ego made a God of sickness that represents a God who's against me. Well, how could God be against me? Well, this is what we believe on some deep level of subconscious level, because I believe that I did something so awful that God can't possibly love me. And all the while, God is saying, come on home, I love you, just like the prodigal son. And that chart. Okay, this chart, if you look very carefully, it says on this side with the ego, something really happened. Over here, it says nothing happened. I don't have to fix what never happened, but I have to remove my belief in the fact that it is real instead of the Holy Spirit, which is the only thing that is really real. But this is the culprit. This is the cloud. This is the block. This is what we have chosen to identify with. And as long as we have chosen to identify with that, it blocks our awareness of the light and the love that is always there. All right. Remember, the ego is about the belief that we are separate, which I just mentioned. If I believe that my body is sick, then I am making the body's purpose real. So what that means is if I'm focusing in on my body and trying to fix my body, heal my body, I'm not going to the mind that needs to be healed. And, we're all guilty of this, and he's not reprimanding us. He just wants us to become aware. If you want true healing, it can only happen with the alignment of your right mind. I can go to the doctor, get fixed here for a small period of time, but if I haven't healed my mind, it's just going to come back and recycle in another form. So we really want to heal the mind, which is the problem, and then the body will take care of itself. And I always do like to bring it back to Jesus dying on the cross, because Jesus dying on the cross, obviously most of us would not be a very happy camper at this point in time if that were to happen to us, because we're so still very invested in our bodies. But Jesus, when he came to that point, knew his body was not who he was, because he was totally aligned with the mind. And as a result of that, he was not affected by what happened in the world. Well, that's, we're Jesus wannabes at this point, I guess you could say. But as we keep working through this process and keep choosing, our willingness to be totally aligned over here will start to increase. And when we realize here, suffering and pain, here, release from suffering and pain, when we really get to the point where we recognize that this doesn't have the value that I thought it had. I give the example of going to online and ordering something from Amazon, and once it comes, it's not quite what you thought it was going to be. See, when we separated from God, we thought I was going to be top dog. God was out of the picture. I'll take care of things. And we thought the love was going to come with us. But it backfired, because we got to be God. We got to be in charge. We get to be right. We get to be special. We get to be an individual. But we lose the connection with the love of God. And when that becomes a priority, we'll be willing to let this go and align with that. Plus, we start to realize something's not right here. The dots aren't connected. The promises that were offered us, if we're a good little boy or girl, aren't coming through with this program. And the reason is because we're trying to manipulate it from the body instead of go to the mind and have the mind come to healing. So he goes on to say, and I'm going to read that line I just read again. If I believe that my body is sick, then I am making the body's purpose real. What's the body's purpose in that? What is the body's purpose? The body's purpose is to keep our focus on the body, so we'll never go back to our mind and heal it. And it also goes on, or he says, if I become upset because you are sick, I'm doing the same thing. These are challenging ways of opening to a new idea of thinking, because I look at my body. I spend a lot of time giving energy to taking care of this body. Probably when we start, 98% of the time, we're body focused. And if we're not focused on our body, we're focused on somebody else's body. But this is really asking us to keep remembering and then keep coming back to the mind, because that's where true healing occurs. The course becomes easy because all problems are the same. All people are the same. Now, it sounds like it'll be easy because, I just have to choose between this and this. But we're so addicted to this that sometimes it's not so easy to drop this so that we can align with this. We're still so charged with the belief system of the ego, and it's not easy to relinquish that, especially if it, what I call, hits below the belt, and it's a major issue that I think needs to be solved before I can go and visit God. But Jesus is saying, choose for me, even if you do things in the world that you think you need to take care of, don't forget to choose again. And again, I'm going to read that again. The course becomes easy because all problems are the same. And I mentioned earlier that workbook lesson. There's one problem, one solution. The problem is we chose to separate. The solution is nothing happened. We didn't happen. All right. So again, all problems and all people are the same, which is very challenging for our minds. But I think if you look and filter it through the concept that I'm either at peace or I'm not at peace. And if I am not at peace, that simply means I'm aligned with the ego. But I do have another choice if I recognize that, and then I'm willing to let this go to find out what this is. We are all joined on the level of our mind. So when you align with the mind level of the Holy Spirit, we automatically become one. We become the same instead of different. Because in oneness, there isn't anything different. It's only in two-ness where you have differences. And when we have two-ness, we end up having dualistic experience, and that always brings problems. All right, so that makes the solution to all problems the same. And again, in our world, there is a major hierarchy of differences. In this process, the only difference in this process is, am I at peace or am I not at peace? It doesn't matter how big the lack of peace is or how significant it appears. Am I at peace? I've chosen wrongly, and I can choose again. And this applies to relationships that have gone before us as well. So in other words, that means if you haven't had an issue, let's say with somebody who's passed on, that you can actually use this process to heal a relationship with something or someone that's already out of your life experience. So anytime is an opportunity to work on healing. All right, so we're going to move to number 20. That's miracle number 20. And this one reads, miracles reawaken the awareness that the spirit, not the body, is the altar of truth. This is the recognition that leads to the healing power of the miracle. So the miracles reawaken the awareness that the spirit, not the body, is the altar to truth. So we could use this concept of the idea, this is a thought, this is a body, this is the world, and the answer lies in the spirit, which is beyond all of this. But I have to be willing to relinquish my alignment with this in order to experience this. And he's then saying, this is the recognition that leads to the healing power of the mind. And again, we talked earlier of this is a course in mind training. It's a course in remembering who you are in your mind that doesn't have anything to do with the body. Holiness is not found in the body, but in the mind. When minds are totally healed, we will recall that truth is in our identity as spirit. And, this really isn't a new concept, because I can remember reading this even in the Bible, in my days of reading the Bible, that they talk about that, but the dots never connected. But when I see it from this perspective of this is all body focused, when I rise above and ask to see through his lens, I'm literally accessing spirit instead of the body, which again requires me to come with wholly empty hands. I can't bring my story and access what's going on there. And again, this is happening all in my mind. And think about it, if it's coming from my mind, there is no story. That's just a projection of the choice in my mind, depending on which choice I'm making. All right. Bodies do not get sick, nor do they get well. For quite some time, I had a puppet that we used to put up in front of the class, and the puppet actually represented this idea of what the body represents. Well, we know a puppet doesn't think, it doesn't talk, it doesn't see. It simply is an operation depending on who's running the puppet. And if it's the ego, the effects of that choice are going to be ego related. And when we choose for the Holy Spirit, the puppet will operate out of the choice of the Holy Spirit instead of the ego. And the Course even goes so far as to say throughout the Course, in different places, in different ways, you do not see, you do not hear, you do not think, the only real thought is the capital T thought, which is truth or love. But our experience unequivocally is, I'm a body in this world, and I not only have thoughts, I hear, I see, I do all those things. But that's how deeply seated we are in the belief system of the ego, because we have, since the Big Bang, been playing in this arena, and it's pretty well established in our experiences. And the Course is trying to flip that around so that you understand this on a different level. And I know a couple of weeks ago I read, here it is actually, that's how great is that? A quote in chapter 12 says, when you made visible what is not true, what is true became invisible to you. So in other words, the truth of heaven became invisible to you because we established ourselves in the dualistic world, and all the solidness of our experience as in the world as a body. So we need help in shifting away from what appears visible, the body, to what we have made invisible, the truth in our minds. So again, every time that we shift from our bodily storyline and ask for help, we're literally aligning with the mind instead of the body. Okay, because again, the problem isn't here and here. The problem is here and here. Am I choosing for the ego, or am I choosing for the Holy Spirit? These are just the effects of the choice that has occurred. But the way it's set up is we forget that there was a choice that's made and another choice that could be made. And we just spent all our time running back and forth here trying to solve the problem here, instead of one problem that I believe I separated and one solution and nothing happened. And that's a process of learning and practicing and understanding and reinforcing that the Course provides for us over and over in lots of different ways. And I think I'll just turn to workbook number 7 real quick. And this is an interesting question or workbook lesson. It says, the title of it is I See Only the Past. And it says this idea is particularly difficult to believe at first. Well, dang, boy, isn't that true? yet it is rational for all the preceding reasons. It is the reason why nothing that you see means anything. And as those of you who have started working on workbook lessons, you know some of the beginning workbook lessons are pretty darn bizarre. And yet Jesus asks us to keep doing them, because by the doing of them, it starts to open up an awareness different than the one we have. And that, again, it's the reason why nothing that you see means anything. Because when I see from the past, I'm projecting that onto the future, and now I'm seeing the results of that choice. Now, they give a number of other things, but I'm going to skip down to paragraph number 3 that says, look at a cup, for example. And a cup is something pretty simple. We don't have a lot of investment in that as far as what the cup does or doesn't do. But as we'll see in this paragraph, it really, we're really living through the past in our understanding of what the cup is about. So look at a cup, for example. Do you see a cup, or are you merely reviewing your past experiences of picking up a cup? Are we just going through the motions of doing the same thing we've always done and seeing the cup through the lens of what the past is? Being thirsty, drinking from a cup, feeling the rim of the cup against your lips, having breakfast, and so on. So there's already I guess you could say, predestined concept of what the cup is, what the cup represents. Are not your aesthetic reactions to the cup too based on past experiences? How else would you know whether or not this kind of cup will break if you drop it? You wouldn't. What do you know about the cup except what you learned in the past? And Jesus is presenting this workbook lesson because he wants us to become aware every moment that I'm coming from the ego, I'm coming from the past, which does not allow me the possibility of a future that's different than the past. If I continue to bring this with me, I'm going to just recycle in the past, and I'm going to recycle the same thing over and over, versus when I let that go and open up to another way, then I can have the experience of living in the moment and seeing what the moment has to allow, or what it presents itself for me. All right, so he goes on to say, you would have no idea what this cup is except for your past learning. So he's saying, then, do you then really see it? And, when we're working on the course, oftentimes we're going to start with the little willingness in opportunities that present themselves that are painful, difficult, and so on. But eventually, even if you, let's say, go out to lunch with one of your favorite people, we don't think about asking to come in the moment in relationship to that person. So we're really living over here when we're not asking to see this through his lens. And again, we're going to start with the more challenging, difficult things. But as we keep working on this process, we're going to begin to apply this to everything, whether it's negative or painful, or if it's just an acquaintance or getting together for lunch. We will begin to ask to see it through his lens. And as we do that, we're literally asking more and more. This is becoming more solid, and this is becoming less and less solid. And eventually, one day, we'll walk over here, and this will be all we want, because nothing over here will feed us any longer. Right now, we're doing the teeter-totter where we're going back and forth because we're still so addicted to this. But one day, we'll choose this and we'll be done with that process. All right. And then he goes on to say, I see only the past in this pencil. I see only the past in the shoe, to get us acclimated to this understanding of we don't see and experience reality, we're seeing a recycling of the past. And in order to come fresh, anew, and have a new awareness, that requires that we come empty of everything with anything we do. All right. So, where do we leave off here? Okay, so the Holy Spirit is God's answer and his voice in the place where he is needed. And when is he needed? When I have the little willingness to relinquish what's going on in my ego world. Where the Holy Spirit is needed is not out in the world, but it is in the mind, because that's where the problem lies. Again, one problem, one solution. The problem is the belief in separation, which is in my mind, gets reflected into the world. And the answer is the separation did not occur. We are choosing to hear the ego's voice of guilt and separation. We are not going to hear the voice or the experience of the presence of the one who represents joining, forgiving, and healing. I'm going to read that again. If we're choosing to hear the ego's voice of guilt and separation, we are not going to hear the voice or experience the presence of the one who represents joining, forgiving, and healing. So if we're listening, as the beautiful words in the Course express, to the raka shrieking in the world, we're not going to be able to hear the voice calling us here because we're so focused on this. Now, be very gentle with yourself in this undoing process, because we are the hero of our dream. And there's so many things, so many ways that the world pulls on us, calls on us. And to just choose, or I guess it's over here, to just choose outside of the dream is not easy right now. But as the willingness increases, we'll spend more and more time out of the dream and less time in the strings that pull us into the illusion. But be very aware that if you're listening to the ego's voice of guilt and separation, you're not going to be able to experience or hear the voice. And understand that the voice is not this, yo, George, come on over and do this. The voice is that memory of love, peace, and stillness that is in your mind. When we are in a relationship and the ego is engaged, we are in a relationship where guilt is the goal and separation is the principle. Whoa. And why is that? Because when we're in the relationship with the ego, where's that chart? You know, too many charts going on over here, I guess. Okay. When we're aligned with this, the purpose of my relationship is to put the guilt on somebody else so that I will appear innocent. When I relate to the Holy Spirit, I don't want my brother to be the bad guy so that I can look like the good guy. I'm tired of the pain that any of this brings, and I want to find out what his answer, and his answer is always, you're the same, you're not different. The setup of the ego is to keep this cycle going. And if I'm too afraid to go over here, I'm going to play over here, blame them for the problem. And then I'm going to feel guilty because I blame them, because on some level, I know that this is what I've chosen. It has nothing to do with my brother, but that's on a very deep subconscious level. But it still triggers the game that gets played over here, which then recycles this, which keeps me from moving over here. So I'm going to read that again. When we are in a relationship and the ego is engaged, we are in a relationship where guilt is the goal and separation is its principle. That's the setup of the ego. The Holy Spirit, Jesus, is trying to help us understand that's the setup when we walked in the door of the world. We were the ones ultimately that made that choice, but just the same, that was set into motion up here. Then we projected it into the world, and then we popped in as a sweet little adorable innocent victim born of parents we didn't ask to be born of, and the whole storyline started and continues to recycle over and over and over again. All right. Then the one who manifests forgiveness and joining will become invisible to you. Much like I just read, what was visible became invisible, and now we're aligned with the ego, which is all we see and experience, which keeps us from recognizing what the truth is. When we are choosing to hear the voice or the experience, the presence of the one who represents joining in forgiveness and healing, then we are aligning with the answer that we're looking for, if indeed we truly want peace. It is not that Jesus is not present in a special relationship, but is present is obscured. So the answer is always here, but we're not going to see the answer because we're focused on this to perpetuate this because of the fear of this. And again, when we get tired of the pain that this brings, our willingness to be to open the door to find out his answer will start to rise. And that's not always going to be that simple, because there's going to be some times when you're going through a conflict here and you might hear the voice that says, you know, you could choose peace instead of this. But because we want to be right, we want to be in charge, we want to be an individual, we want to be special, we cling to this. And we're also so addicted to the game that's being played here that some days it's hard to let that go. And of course, Jesus would say, it's okay that you're not ready to let it go, but know that the reason you're not experiencing peace is because you're holding on to this and you're not willing to align with this. But eventually we will want to do that because we won't want to experience the pain anymore. But if you're thinking, God doesn't love me enough, God won't come home, won't let me in the doors, blah, blah, blah. This is trying to help us be very honest. If I'm not ready to relinquish this, it simply means I'm afraid of this. And if I'm afraid of this, I'm not going to run to God's arms. But I can't blame him anymore, because it's the choice that I've made that I'm holding on to that's keeping it going. All right. When we truly forgive and shift the purpose of the relationship from the ego's guilt to his forgiveness, then we will know he is there. Because the way I access his truth is when I relinquish this and find out what this is. And then it begins to reflect in your world in ways that, not necessarily in your world, but in yourself, where something is shifting and changing. And it may reflect in the world, but if I do this to have the world change, then I'm not really doing it for the right purpose, and it's likely to backfire on me. The veils of guilt that kept him hidden are removed. Again, remove the blocks to the awareness of love is the goal of this course. Okay, we're going to move on to miracle number 21. Miracles are natural signs of forgiveness. Through miracles, you accept God's forgiveness by extending it to others. So I like that first part. Miracles are natural signs of forgiveness. Miracles are the result of choosing for forgiveness. Automatically takes you over here, but I can't be pointing a finger at them or at me if I want to access or recognize this. But this becomes a natural sign. And through miracles, you accept God's forgiveness by extending it to others. I can't go over here without taking my brother, which means I have to drop the story. And we have some really good stories, people. It's hard to drop those stories at times. But if I want to see his results instead of mine, it's a requirement. Miracles, forgiveness, healing, and atonement are all the same. I'm going to repeat that. Miracles, forgiveness, and healing and atonement are all the same. Vision, real world, the holy instant, the holy relationship, salvation, redemption, correction, the face of Christ, Christ's vision, true perception are all different words that reflect different aspects of the same process. And I'll repeat that second grouping. Vision, real world, the holy instant, the holy relationship, salvation, redemption, correction, the face of Christ, and Christ's vision and true perception. These are different words that represent the same basic process. Basically, forgiveness, as the Course defines it, is forgiving your brother for what he has not done. What does that mean? When we chose for the ego, we projected into the world, made our brother the guilty party so that we could appear to be the innocent victim. When we drop this story, we don't have the innocent victim perpetrator story going on any longer. And when we open it to a different answer, we are shown my brother and I are the same. I no longer need to work through this facade in order to maintain my presence as an innocent victim. And be very aware in this process, I have to have some kind of perpetrator. It can be a person, it can be my boss, it can be the person cutting me off the road, it can be my nail breaking, being sick, it can be anything that maintains I'm an innocent victim of fill in the space. Doesn't matter what it is. And over here, I can't be an innocent victim and I can't have a perpetrator. So that means I have to drop my story. And again, gosh, we have some good stories. All right. So again, we have to forgive our brother for what he has not done. And again, be very aware. We are so set up and be aware that this over here, it says with the ego, kill or be killed. That's the setup of the ego. That's the programming of the ego. My job is to kill you off, and your job is to kill me off. Not necessarily physically, but in the mind, because we're separate, and only one can be on the throne when we're separated. And I want to be the one, and you want to be the one. So we're going back, bantering back and forth. And the only way this can really be resolved is to step over here where we find out we're really just one. All right, so again, not only for what they have not done, because nothing has been done to us, but dang, it sure feels like something's been done to us, doesn't it? It is all something you did to yourself, and you didn't do it to yourself as the character in the dream. We did it to ourselves as one collective Son of God in this initial point when we chose to separate and we took God's place on the throne and we decided we were going to be in control. And the effects of that is some form of difficulty or innocent victim some need to be an innocent victim, some aspect of there's something wrong and it's not my fault. That's how it is that we've done this to ourselves. What happens when the miracle, when we choose for a miracle, is that we shift from the ego's attack and hatred to the love in us and through us to other people. So when you relinquish your brother's your story about your brother, you're saying, I don't know. I want to find out what your answer. I want to see who my brother is through your eyes. Because through my eyes, oh boy, do I have reasons to have an issue with this person. And I don't think there's anything wrong with starting with that and spending some time with that and yelling and screaming or whatever it is you have to do. But eventually, when you calm down and the words of the Course rise to the surface, that you choose to align with him so he can show you who your brother really is. Because literally, we were programmed to see our brother as guilty, but that guilt is coming from our mind. So who's the problem? The one that projected it out there, or the one that's been projected? And the answer is the one that projected it. And when we projected into the world, we took our guilt, put it on them, then pretended we were the innocent victim. Not a nice thing to do, and it's not working out too well because that guilt keeps coming back to us. And we're always trying to find ways to make them different. So I'll be okay in their presence, which isn't going to work as long as I'm aligned with the ego thought system. All right, Jesus wants us to live through the same principles of forgiveness that he demonstrated. He's not asking us to do something that he hasn't accomplished. In fact, he very specifically states at one point in time in the Course that he presented one of the more difficult classrooms, dying on the cross, to show us that if he can make it through that, we can make it through all the crucifixions that we experience. Because he eventually came to align completely with his right mind. And remember, we talked about this as a course in shifting from the body to the mind. When we're totally aligned with the mind of the Holy Spirit, what happens to the body is no longer significant, because my identification lies completely in my mind. The more that we do it, the more we will understand what he taught, and the closer we will come to him. And again, we have to begin by understanding what we did to set up the choice that we're living in, and then what to eventually do to come to the point where we are demonstrating what he demonstrated. And Ken would often say, when we begin this process, we're going to call on the Holy Spirit or Jesus for help. We're going to ask him to tuck us in, give us a drink of milk before we go to bed. But our goal isn't to keep asking for help over here. Our goal is to shift to over here, where we can now demonstrate exactly what he did, and we will align and stand next to him and be that light that draws other people in. Similarly, with the Course, the more we can practice its lessons of undoing guilt through forgiveness, the more we will be able to understand what the text is saying. Because, initially when we start, I don't care which part of the Course you're reading, it's not easy for us to understand what he's saying. But as we begin to understand the setup, understand the process of the Course, and open to the willingness of asking to see this differently, eventually it will all come together and it will make perfect sense. It does take some time, though. Of course, the more we can understand it, the easier it becomes to apply it in our daily life. And as we keep choosing differently and we spend time over here, we start to see what the reflection of that love looks like. And it oftentimes will turn out to be something beyond me that I would never have figured out myself. So we begin to trust this process, and this process becomes more in alignment with what we want instead of what we chose before. And we'll begin to send back the items we ordered from Amazon that aren't working anymore, because we want to find out what the real answer or the real choice is.